The room had 200 reporters in it, cameras everywhere, microphones stacked so high on the podium they looked like a bouquet made of steel. And LeBron James, a man who had stood at the center of the world's attention for 2 decades, sat down in that chair, looked into the lights, and said something nobody expected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table. He just said it, steady and clear, the way a man says something he has been carrying a long time, the way a man speaks when he has finally decided that silence costs more than words. The room went quiet in a way press conference rooms almost never go quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for the next question. A different kind. The kind where 200 people are recalibrating everything they thought this moment was going to be about. Because this was the day before the NBA Finals. Game 1, Cleveland Cavaliers versus Golden State Warriors, the most anticipated basketball series in years. This was supposed to be about matchups and strategy and who would guard Kevin Durant. And LeBron James was sitting at that podium talking about Emmett Till. What led to that moment and what happened because of it is a story about a lot of things. It is about basketball, yes, but more than that, it is about what it costs to be great and black in America at the same time. And it is about one ordinary woman working an overnight shift at a security monitoring station 6 miles from LeBron's house, who noticed something at 3:47 inches the morning and made a phone call that changed what happened next. Stay with me, because by the end you will understand why that phone call mattered as much as anything that happened on the basketball court. To understand the summer of 2017, you have to understand what was at stake. Not just in basketball terms, though the stakes there were enormous. You have to understand what LeBron James had already been through and what he was carrying into that week. LeBron Raymond James was born on the 30th of December 1984 in Akron, Ohio. Not a glamorous city. Not a place that produces legends on a regular schedule. Akron sits in the northeastern corner of Ohio, a former rubber manufacturing hub that, by the mid-1982s, had gone through the same slow hollowing out that hit dozens of American industrial cities. Jobs leaving, neighborhoods fraying, families doing what they could to hold things together. His mother, Gloria James, was 16 years old when he was born. His father was not in the picture. Gloria was young and determined and deeply loved her son. But there were stretches of LeBron's early childhood that were genuinely hard. Stability was something other families seemed to have in greater supply. He bounced between apartments and relatives, sometimes missing months of school because there was no fixed address to attend from. What kept him anchored, what gave the chaos a center, was sports, and then basketball specifically. And then basketball so specifically that by the time he was in middle school, the scouts were already arriving in Akron to watch this tall, fluid, almost impossibly gifted child move around a gymnasium. He never left Ohio. Not really. He could have gone anywhere for high school, could have accepted any of the prep school offers that flooded his mailbox. He stayed in Akron, attended Street Vincent Street, Mary High School, became the most talked-about high school player in the country. Sports Illustrated put him on the cover at 17. The headline read, "The Chosen One," and that phrase would follow him for the rest of his life, like a second shadow. He entered the NBA draft straight out of high school in 2003. Cleveland took him first overall. He came home, played for the Cavaliers, became the best player in the league, and then, in 2010, made the most controversial decision of his career. He left Cleveland. He took his talents to Miami in a televised announcement that the city of Cleveland responded to by burning his jersey in the streets. That split is worth sitting with for a moment. LeBron James, a man from Akron, Ohio, became the villain in his own hometown. He spent 4 years in Miami, won 2 championships, built a legacy there. Then in 2014 he came back to Cleveland, and when he came back, he said something that stuck. He said he was coming home to finish what he started. He said Northeast Ohio deserved a championship more than any place he could imagine, and in 2016 he delivered it. He led the Cavaliers back from a 3-1 deficit against Golden State, a thing almost nobody believed was possible, and won the NBA championship. He ran across the court at the final buzzer with tears streaming down his face. He had given his city something it had never had. That 2016 championship was one of the defining moments of his career. Maybe the defining moment. And now, in 2017, the rematch was here. Golden State had added Kevin Durant to an already historically great team. The Warriors were the clear favourite. Most analysts thought Cleveland had almost no chance, and LeBron, who had been playing basketball at the highest level for 14 years by this point, was preparing to carry his team into the most difficult series of his professional life. That was the backdrop. That was what June 2017 was supposed to be about. LeBron versus the Warriors. Can he do the impossible again? And then someone painted a word on his gate. The house sat in a neighborhood in the Brentwood section of Los Angeles. This was LeBron's California home, a property he had purchased some years earlier as the James family spent parts of the off-season in Southern California. It was a large house on a quiet street, the kind of neighborhood where people largely left each other alone, where the gates and the hedges and the geography of the lots created a private kind of peace. LeBron and his family were not there that week. They were in the Bay Area, preparing for the finals. The house was staffed by a small security and household team, standard practice for a residence of that size when the primary family is away. The spray paint appeared sometime between 2 and 4 inches the morning on the 1st of June 2017. One word. A racial slur painted directly on the main entrance gate of the property in large letters. Whoever did it was gone before anyone on the property's overnight staff noticed. The first person outside the property to see it was a woman named Dolores Watkins. Dolores was 54 years old, a remote security monitoring technician. She worked the overnight shift at a private monitoring center about 6 miles from LeBron's property. Her job was to watch camera feeds for a portfolio of high-end residential properties across the Los Angeles area, roughly 40 properties on her rotation on any given night. She had a chair, a bank of monitors arranged in a semicircle around her station, a thermos of coffee she refilled twice a shift, and a laminated contact sheet for each property taped to the edge of her desk. She had worked this job for 11 years. She was not glamorous about it. She wore reading glasses on a lanyard around her neck and kept a small succulent plant on the corner of her desk because the monitoring room had no windows and she liked having something alive nearby. She was the kind of person who remembered every property on her rotation, not because her supervisors asked her to, but because that was just how she worked. She paid attention. It was her nature. The exterior gate camera for the James property was positioned to capture the full front facade of the entrance. Good lighting, wide angle, clear resolution. Dolores swept to that feed, and in the first half-second she knew something was wrong. She leaned forward, pulled her glasses from the lanyard and put them on. She enlarged the feed on her monitor. She sat with it for about 4 seconds. Then she picked up the phone. The protocol for something like this was to call the property's emergency contact first, then local law enforcement. The emergency contact number for the James property rolled to a member of the household security team who lived on the grounds. He picked up on the second ring. She told him what she was seeing. He said he would check it and call her back. He called back in 3 minutes. Yes, it was there. On the gate, spray painted. He was already on the phone with the property manager. Delors stayed on the line, kept her monitor fixed on that feed, and waited. A Los Angeles Police Department patrol car arrived on the scene. Then another. The LAPD had opened a hate crime investigation. The story was everywhere. LeBron James found out the way most of us find out bad news that travels fast. His phone. He was in his hotel room in the Bay Area, awake early the way athletes tend to be the week of the finals, running through mental preparation routines that look nothing like what most people imagine. Not highlight reels, not victory fantasies. Quiet review, the specific details of what Golden State did in certain situations, the tendencies of individual defenders, the moments in a game where margin becomes decisive. His phone lit up. He read about what had been painted on his gate the same way the rest of the country did, through news alerts and text messages and the relentless engine of social media that had already been running with the story for 2 hours by the commas. Time it reached him. The people who were with him that morning, people close to him, part of his inner circle later, described the room as going very quiet. Not the angry quiet of someone about to respond in fury. Something deeper than that. Something older. The kind of quiet that comes when something happens that you have been, on some level, half expecting your entire life. Not this specific thing, not spray paint on a gate, but the reminder, the fact of it, the confirmation that certain things do not go away regardless of what you achieve. He didn't hold a press conference that morning. He didn't post on social media. He went to practice. There is something in that worth pausing on. The man found out his home had been targeted with a racial slur hours before one of the most important games of his professional career, and he went to practice. He worked. He prepared, because that's what you do when you are LeBron James, and a city and a franchise and a team full of people are counting on you, and because showing up is sometimes the only answer available that costs anything real. But he was carrying it. Anyone who watched him practice that morning could see it. He was present, he was focused, but there was a weight behind his eyes that the basketball itself couldn't reach. The press conference was scheduled for early afternoon. The finals media availability, the ritual gathering where reporters from every outlet ask questions, and the athletes say careful things about preparation and opponent respect and team chemistry. It is, on most days, one of the more choreographed events in professional sports. Everyone knows their role. Everyone understands the performance. LeBron James did not perform that day. He sat down at the table. The microphones were stacked in front of him. The cameras were pointed. The room was a size that swallowed sound, one of those convention-level ballrooms in a Bay Area hotel that had been configured for media. Maybe 200 people arranged in tiered rows, recorders and notebooks and cameras on every surface. The first question was about the game. Strategy. Golden State's defensive adjustments. A reasonable basketball question for a basketball press conference. LeBron answered it. Thoughtfully, specifically, the way he always answered basketball questions with a level of tactical detail that made clear he had been thinking about this for weeks. He talked about spacing, about transition, defense, about what the Warriors did to exploit gaps. It was a good answer, a complete answer. And then he paused. Not the pause of someone gathering their next thought. A different kind of pause. The pause of someone deciding. The room shifted. You could feel it, one of those collective physical responses that happens in spaces where many people are paying close attention to the same thing. He talked about his gait. He confirmed it, calmly, for anyone who hadn't heard. He talked about his family and said they were safe and that his children were okay. And then he said the thing that the whole room was not expecting. He said it quietly, and he said it plainly, and he held nothing back. He let that land. He didn't rush to the next sentence. We've been dealing with it since African Americans were brought here to this country. Then he went somewhere almost no athlete goes in a press conference. He went to history. He reached back 62 years to 1955 to a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till, who was murdered in Money, Mississippi, and whose mother, Mamie Till, made the decision to have an open casket funeral so that the world could not look away from what had been done to her son. He said that image, that act of courage by Mamie Till, that refusal to let the wound be hidden that stayed with him, that mattered to him. Think about what it means to invoke Emmett Till while sitting in a hotel ballroom in the Bay Area the day before an NBA Finals game. Think about the distance between those two things, the horror of 1955 and the press conference in 2017, and then think about what LeBron was saying by refusing to treat them as unconnected. He was saying, they are connected. He was saying, this is the same thread. He was saying 62 years have passed, and a word on a gate on a June morning in Los Angeles is part of the same fabric as a child in a casket in Mississippi. That takes something, that takes a particular kind of courage. Not the courage of a fast break, not the courage of a fourth-quarter shot. The courage of a man who could have said nothing, who had every strategic reason to say nothing, and chose to speak anyway. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first read about that press conference, I had to sit with it for a while, because it is easy to hear a story like this and file it under powerful moment and move on. But the weight of what he was saying doesn't get lighter if you actually think about it. This man had just had his home violated, his family's privacy broken, a slur painted on his gate for his wife and his children to potentially see. And instead of keeping that private, instead of letting the legal process handle it quietly, he stood up in front of the world and said, "This is what it looks like. Don't look away from this." He was doing what Mamie Till did, on a completely different scale, in completely different circumstances, but the same fundamental thing. He was refusing to let it be hidden. The room was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then a reporter asked a follow-up, and LeBron answered it. And then another reporter asked about basketball, and he answered that too. The press conference continued the way press conferences continue, but something had changed in the room. Something had shifted in the air. Now, let's go back to Dolores Watkins, because her part in this story is not finished. The way she always did. She logged the incident into the monitoring system's incident report, database camera feed, designation, timestamp, nature of incident, actions taken, responding agencies. She typed quickly and accurately. She had filed hundreds of these reports over 11 years. This one was different in scale, obviously, but the procedure was the same. She did her job. Then she went home. She had no idea that the story had exploded across every media platform while she was finishing her paperwork. She didn't find out until her daughter called her at 8 in the morning while she was trying to sleep. "Mama." Dolores rolled over in bed, squinted at her phone. "I was there at 4 in the morning, baby." A pause on the other end. Dolores told her daughter what happened. Her daughter Camille, 28 years old, worked in logistics, sharp and practical, listened to the whole thing, and then said something that Dolores did not expect. Dolores wasn't sure what she meant. She had filed the incident report. She had followed protocol. That was the job. That was what she was paid to do. "No," Camille said. "I mean, you need to tell someone what it felt like when you saw it." Dolores thought about that for a moment. She was not a person who sought attention. 11 years of overnight shifts in a windowless room with a succulent plant and a thermos of coffee, that is not the profile of a person who needs to be known. She did her work. She went home. She slept during the day. She came back and did it again. But something about what her daughter said stayed with her as she tried to fall back asleep. Because the truth was, she had felt something when she saw that gate. It wasn't just professional recognition, "There's something wrong with this camera feed." Escalate the call. It was something older than that, something that lived in her chest. She was a black woman who had grown up in Los Angeles. She knew what that word meant. She knew what it felt like to see it. And she knew, in the way that certain knowledge is not intellectual but physical, bone deep, what it felt like to see it on the gate of the most famous black man in America the night before the biggest game of his career. She made the call at 3:47 inches the morning because that was her job. But she also made it, and she would admit this later, privately, to her daughter because she wanted someone to know. She wanted a light to come on somewhere. She wanted a response to be sent. She fell asleep eventually. She dreamed about nothing she could remember. 3 days after the incident, a member of LeBron's management team made a request through the property management company for the contact information of whoever had logged the initial overnight monitoring report. Standard process for following up after a security incident at a property, the owner's team wanted to understand the full timeline, identify any gaps, review what had been captured on camera before and after the event. The property manager passed along Dolores' information. Someone from the management team called her on a Wednesday afternoon. She was awake, on her day off, watching television. She answered, assuming it was a follow-up about the incident report, maybe something she had missed in her documentation. The voice on the other end was professional, warm, and specific. He explained who he was. He thanked her for the speed and thoroughness of her response that night. He said the James family was aware of the timeline and understood that her call had ensured law enforcement arrived within the window where evidence could be properly secured. He said they wanted her to know that. Dolores said she was just doing her job. There was a brief pause on the other end. "We know," the man said. Then he said there was something else, and could he speak with her for a few more minutes? The something else was this. LeBron James, through his foundation, the LeBron James Family Foundation, which had been operating in Akron for years, focused on educational support for at-risk youth, was in the process of expanding a mentorship and scholarship program in Los Angeles. They were looking for community partners, people who could speak to students from underserved neighborhoods about careers in technology, security systems, emergency response fields that young people from certain zip codes often did not see as accessible or even visible to them. Would Dolores be interested in speaking to a group of high school students about her career? She was quiet for a moment. She said she was just a woman who watched cameras. The man on the phone said something that stopped her. He said, "You watched cameras on the right night and did the right thing. That's the whole story." She said yes. Of course she said yes. Not because of who it was connected to. That part still felt surreal, like something happening to a different version of her life. She said yes because of the students. Because she remembered being a young woman in Los Angeles with no particular roadmap and no particular person who had ever pointed at her life and said, "This is possible. You could do this. There is a path from where you are to a place that is stable and meaningful." She said yes because she wished someone had said that to her. The event was held at a community center in Inglewood 6 weeks later on a Saturday morning in late July. 43 high school students, mostly from South and East Los Angeles, ages 15 to 18. Boys and girls who had been identified through the Foundation's network as students with potential and drive and limited resources. Dolores wore a pressed blouse and the good earrings her mother had left her. She brought her incident report log from that night, not the actual document, which was confidential, but a recreation she had written out on her own paper to use as a teaching tool. She talked about what remote security monitoring actually was. She talked about the technical side, how the camera systems worked, how the monitoring software flagged anomalies, how an operator like her cross-referenced dozens of feeds in a single shift. She talked about what the job paid, what the advancement track looked like, what certifications were available, and then she talked about 3:47 inches the morning. She didn't make it dramatic. She did not perform for the room. She stood in front of those 43 students and described what she had seen and what she had felt and what she had done. She said she had been tired. She said it was the 4th hour of a 6-hour shift, and she had already refilled her thermos twice, and her lower back was doing what it always did by that point in the night. She said she was just doing what she always did, which was pay attention. Paying attention, she said, is not a small thing. I need you to understand that. In the work I do, and in most work you'll ever do, the person who pays attention is the person who matters. Not the loudest person, not the most impressive person. A boy in the 3rd row raised his hand. He looked about 16, tall and sceptical in the way 16-year-old boys often are when an adult is talking to them, he asked. The room laughed a little. Dolores smiled. Every single night, she said, and I do it anyway, because boring and unimportant are not the same thing. I spent 11 years in a room with no windows, and on one particular night, what I did in that room mattered. You don't get to know in advance which night that will be. The room was quiet. Then the sceptical boy in the 3rd row nodded, slowly, like a person accepting something he hadn't planned on accepting. After the event, several students stayed to talk to Dolores. A girl named Jasmine, 17, said she had been thinking about trade school but wasn't sure what direction. Dolores gave her the name of 2 certification programs in security systems technology and told her to look them up, and if she had questions, to write them down, and she would try to find answers. She wrote her email address on a piece of paper and handed it to the girl. The foundation staff took photographs. Dolores stood with students and smiled and felt in a way she had not anticipated. Like herself. Like the fullest version of herself. The version that had been sitting in a monitoring room for 11 years, accumulating something she hadn't known how to name, and now standing in a community centre in Inglewood on a Saturday morning understood was experience. Hard-won, real, transferable experience. Now let's go back to the game, because that part of this story matters too. Game 1 of the 2017 NBA Finals was played on June 1st at Oracle Arena in Oakland. The Warriors were dominant from the first quarter. Golden State moved the ball with that characteristic fluency. The 5-out spacing, the constant motion, the way Kevin Durant and Stephen Curry could each individually destroy a defense, and together were something approaching unfair. Cleveland fought, but they lost that game by a larger margin than most people expected. LeBron James scored 28 points. He had 8 assists and 8 rebounds. Statistically, it was a strong performance. The team around him struggled, and the Warriors were better, and it wasn't close by the end. He had stood at that podium hours before and said something that had moved the world. And then he had gone out and played basketball, and basketball had been basketball, indifferent to the weight of what he was carrying. The series that followed was hard. Golden State won in 5 games. It was not a sweep, and there were moments where Cleveland showed why they deserved to be there. But the Warriors were better, and the series confirmed it. LeBron played brilliantly in a losing effort. He averaged 33 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 assists over the finals, numbers that would have won the MVP in almost any other series in history. But the Warriors didn't allow the series to hinge on LeBron alone, because they didn't have to. He lost. He stood on the court afterward and shook hands with the Warriors players and watched the trophy presentation, and then walked to the locker room in the way that athletes walk to locker rooms when a season is over and they are processing it. In real time, the same way anyone processes a significant loss without the full vocabulary for it yet. The feelings arriving ahead of the language. Some people looked at that series and said LeBron's speech had been a distraction, that he should have focused, that the press conference had been too emotional, too political, too much for the eve of the finals. Those people misunderstood what they were watching. What LeBron James did in that press conference was not a distraction from his basketball. It was an extension of the same thing that makes him what he is as a player. The willingness to be present, to acknowledge what is real rather than hide from it, to carry weight without pretending it isn't there. Every athlete who has played at the highest level will tell you that the mental discipline required is not about suppressing what you feel. It is about acknowledging what you feel and continuing anyway. LeBron acknowledged what he felt in front of 200 cameras, and then he went out and played some of the best basketball of his career. He lost the series. He did not lose himself. There is a difference. Back in Los Angeles, in the weeks after the finals, the investigation into the graffiti on LeBron's gate continued. The LAPD's hate crimes unit, which had been assigned the case, worked through surveillance footage from nearby properties and street cameras. Eventually, the responsible individual was identified. Legal proceedings followed. LeBron's team did not make extensive public comment on the investigation. They let the process work. But something else was working too. The press conference, specifically that moment, those words about money and fame and the difficulty of being black in America, had a life of its own. It was clipped and shared hundreds of thousands of times. It was analysed by journalists and academics and athletes and ordinary people who saw in it something they had been waiting for someone to say out loud. Not a political speech, not a carefully crafted statement from a public relations team, just a man sitting at a table telling the truth about his life. Athletes are often asked to be symbols without being allowed to be people. LeBron had spent his entire career navigating that particular tension. He was a symbol of black excellence, of possibility, of what could be achieved from nothing. And symbols are supposed to remain above the fray. Symbols are not supposed to be vulnerable. Symbols are not supposed to sit at a press conference and say, "This is hard, this is still hard, even here." He said it anyway. And the response told him something. Not just the positive response, the support, the solidarity, the thousands of messages from people who said those words changed something for them, but also the negative response. The people who said he should stick to sports. The people who said he was being too sensitive. The people who could not bear to look at what he was showing them. That response, both sides of it, was the proof of exactly what he had been saying. Because if what he described was truly a thing of the past, if the world he described did not actually exist, nobody would have been uncomfortable hearing him name it. The discomfort was the confirmation. Dolores Watkins spoke at 2 more foundation events that year, one in October, one in December. By December, she had received 3 emails from Jasmine, the 17-year-old from the first event, with specific questions about the security technology certification programs. She had answered all 3. In January of the following year, Jasmine enrolled in a certification program at a community college in Torrance. Dolores found out in a message from a foundation staff member. She was at work, in the monitoring room. 2:00 inches the morning, 4th hour of her shift, thermos of coffee beside her, the bank of monitors arranged in a semicircle around her station. She read the message on her phone between camera sweeps. She put the phone down. She looked at the monitors. She did the next sweep. She paused on one of the residential feeds for a moment, not for any operational reason, just to pause, and then she continued. She refilled her thermos at 2:20. She went back to her station. She kept watching. There is a version of this story where Dolores Watkins gets a large, dramatic reward, a ceremony, a check, a moment where someone puts a spotlight on her and says, "This woman, right here, she is the one who started it all that night." And there is something appealing about that version, something satisfying. We like our heroes to be recognized in proportion to what they did. But the truth is more ordinary and more lasting. What Dolores got was a platform, a room of 43 students, and then another room, and then one girl named Jasmine who enrolled in a certification program because an adult she trusted wrote her email address on a piece of paper and said, "I will try to find answers." That is not a ceremony. That is not a check. That is something quieter and more durable than either of those things. She kept showing up for overnight shifts in a windowless room. She kept the succulent plant on the corner of her desk. She kept refilling her thermos. She kept paying attention. The thing about the summer of 2017 is that it did not resolve neatly. It was not a parable with a clean ending. LeBron lost the finals. The person who painted his gate was eventually identified, but the act itself could not be undone. The image could not be unseen. The speech he gave was celebrated by many people and dismissed by others, and the dismissal was itself another version of the same thing he had been describing. The world did not change in a fundamental way because of one press conference, but something did happen, something real. A man who could have said nothing chose to say something. He reached back 62 years to Mamie Till and said, "This is connected. This is the same thread. Do not tell me these things are unrelated to each other." He did that the day before the NBA Finals. Under the cameras, under the lights, with everything professionally at stake, and a woman who nobody was watching, sitting in a room 6 miles away from his gate, had been the first one to see what someone had done in the dark. She saw it because she was paying attention. She called it in because she knew what that word meant, and she wanted a response to be sent. Those two things, LeBron's willingness to speak and Delorce's willingness to watch, were not coordinated. They did not know each other. They were just two people doing what they believed was necessary, each in their own domain, each at their own cost. That is, in the end, what most meaningful things consist of. Not grand gestures by powerful people alone, but the accumulation of smaller acts by people paying attention, the woman in the monitoring room at 3:47 inches the morning, the athlete at the podium who decided that honesty cost less than silence, the girl who enrolled in a program because an adult handed her a piece of paper with an email address and meant it. These things compound, they find each other, they build something that no single person could build alone. Here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this story. LeBron James referenced Emmett Till's mother not because he was comparing his situation to Emmett Till's death. He was clear about that. He was not claiming equivalence between a murdered child and spray paint on a gate. He was invoking Mamie Till's courage as a principle. The principle of refusing to hide the wound. The principle of saying, "Look at this. Look at what this is. Look at what this costs. Do not let me carry this alone in the dark." That principle is old. It predates LeBron by generations. Mamie Till understood it in 1955 when she made one of the most heartbreaking decisions a mother could make. She understood that grief kept private can be dismissed, that suffering made invisible can be denied, that the only way to make people understand what racism costs is to show them specifically and without flinching what it actually costs. LeBron did not open a casket. He opened a press conference. He walked into a room full of cameras that were pointed at him for basketball reasons, and he used them for human reasons. He said, "This is my life. This is what happened to my home last night. This is what exists in this country. I am the most famous basketball player in the world, and I am telling you that I am not insulated from this, that no one is, that the insulation you imagine success provides is a comfortable fiction." That kind of honesty is not automatic. It is not free. There are people who have spent decades trying to convince LeBron James to be smaller than he is, to restrict himself to the domain of sport, to accept the terms that have historically been offered to successful black athletes. "We will celebrate what you do on the court if you agree to say nothing about what happens off it." He has refused those terms consistently for his entire career. That refusal has cost him things. It has also made him something more than an athlete. It has made him a figure in a larger story, one that he understands himself to be part of. He played basketball the day after that press conference. He played brilliantly and lost anyway. He went home. He processed it. He came back the next season. He is LeBron James, and that is what LeBron James does. But that afternoon, at that podium, he did something that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with who he is as a man. He told the truth. He said it out loud. He refused to perform composure he didn't feel. And 6 miles away, a woman who had spent 11 years watching cameras nobody else was watching had already sent the first response. If this story moved you, and I hope some part of it did, I want to ask you something before you go. Think about the people in your own world who are paying attention in the dark. The people who are doing the unglamorous, essential work of noticing things. Not the people on the podiums. Not the people in the spotlights. The ones doing the night shifts. The ones filing the reports. The ones who see what's wrong at 3:47 inches the morning and make the call. Those people exist everywhere. They do not always get platforms. They do not always get recognized. Most of the time, they go home and sleep during the day and come back and do it again. But they matter in ways that do not show up in the headlines. LeBron James told the world that being black in America is tough. He said it so that no one could claim they didn't know. He said it so that the record would be clear. Dolores Watkins made sure there was a record at all. Both of those things were necessary. Both of them took something, and both of them mattered. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe, because there are people in every city and every community who are carrying things the world does not see, doing work the world does not honor, making calls in the early hours that nobody will remember except the people it saves. They deserve to be known.